Did Denmark find the answer to immigration while Trump chose barbarism instead? And I base this basically on two things. I mean, they're both kind of what's going on in Europe right now, what's going on with Denmark. The way I learned about it first was on Sunday. Fareed Zakaria opened his show with a little rant about this, which I thought was interesting. And then the New York Times published a piece on Sunday, separate from Fareed's Washington Post commentary. And what they point out is something that, frankly, I saw coming. If you've been listening to this program for a long time, it was 17 years ago, it was 2008. The second week of June in 2008, Louise and I went to Copenhagen, Denmark, and we did our show from Denmark for a week. Danish radio, which is kind of the Danish equivalent of National Public Radio. It's the state broadcaster. They loaned us a studio and they loaned us a producer. They didn't loan her to us. We actually paid her. We hired her, but they made her available to us. And at that time, back in 2007, kind of the signature of this program was that I debated conservatives. We used to get on people from Heritage Foundation. We used to get people on from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, the Ayn Rand people. I mean, there was just a bunch of people who would come on and, conservatives who would come on and debate me. We tried to do 2 a week and typically did. I mean, sometimes even 3 a week. And of course, what happened, the reason that no longer goes on is because over the last decade, principally since Trump, in 2015, but basically over the last decade, the conservative echo chamber, the conservative media infrastructure has gotten so massive that these guys no longer feel like they've got to come on programs like mine or even mainstream programs. You don't even see them that often on MSNBC or CNN any longer. Because they have their own little ecosystem. They talk to their own people and they don't need us anymore. But anyhow, back in 2007, I was always debating conservatives. And so when we hired this producer at Danish radio, and everybody in Denmark speaks English, it seems, I said I would like to have on, we want to have some prominent politicians, and that would be a few liberals, but mostly I want the conservatives. And she just did an incredible job. She got us like the number 2 or 3 guy in the parliament, in terms of power, the major conservative guy. She got the publisher of the Danish newspaper that I believe it was the one that was threatened because of the cartoons, and that was actually a conservative newspaper. She got us a bunch of great conservatives. And basically every single one of them, I asked a series of questions that kind of were pretty straightforward. I'd say, well, okay, you're a conservative. Does that mean that you oppose the fact that about 80% of your economy, your workforce, is represented by unions? And so you have a functional minimum wage. There's not a legal minimum wage in Denmark. It doesn't need to be because there's so much unionization. But the effect is that the minimum wage in Denmark is around $18 an hour. McDonald's pays over $20 an hour in Denmark. And their burgers cost the same as they do here. So anyhow, I said, you're a conservative. Does that mean you want to do away with the unions? And they were like, no, of course not. We don't want people in Denmark living in poverty. So I said, okay, you're conservative. You want to do away with the free college and the $1,000 a month that you give every college student in the country as a stipend to cover their living expenses while they're going to college, in addition to free college and books. And again, these conservatives would say, what, are you crazy? We don't want to see our country's intellectual infrastructure destroyed. We conservatives value education. So then I'd say, well, you must, as a conservative, you must want to do away with your country's single-payer health care. I mean, you've got a Medicare for all system where doctor visits are free, hospital visits are free, dental is super, super cheap, subsidized, drugs are super cheap, and, it's all paid for by federal taxes. I mean, it's not even a special fee. You must want to do away with that. And they're like, what, are you nuts? I don't want to sit next to a sick person, in the restaurant or on the bus. And healthcare is a human right. And so I'd say, well, if you're a conservative, a Danish conservative, does that mean that you want to do away with, like green energy or cleaning up the environment? And they're like, are you crazy? Who'd be stupid enough to want to do that? We conservatives, and by the way, this is true, the conservatives in Denmark are at the forefront of the green energy revolution. They're helping lead it. So finally I get to, okay, well, I realize the conservatives would like to lower taxes a little bit, and I realize that the conservatives generally are supporters of the Danish monarchy. Those are two of the, cardinal characteristics of conservatives in Denmark. But what is it that really makes you a conservative in the minds of people who vote for you? And the answer from every single one of them was, we don't want all these immigrants. There's too many immigrants. Now, this was before the big wave of Syrian immigrants. I think it was 2 or 3 million Syrian immigrants who flooded into Europe in 2015 when Putin bombed the crap out of Aleppo and Damascus, when you had the Syrian civil war. And so it eventually got even far worse. And what happened after that, after that 2015, a decade ago influx, was that the Danish moderates, the Danish equivalent of the Democratic Party, and the Danish progressives, which would be, the equivalent of the progressive caucus in the Democratic Party. Over there's the Greens and things like that. All joined forces with the conservatives, and they said, let's reform our immigration system, because everybody's pissed off about this. And it was empowering the hard right, the Nazi right, the neo-Nazi right in Denmark. And so they did it. They made it much harder to claim asylum in Denmark. Now, if you have a genuine asylum claim and you are truly, your life is at risk, Denmark will still take you in. They made it a lot harder to immigrate to Denmark. You have to learn the language now, and you have to, you have to have a job, and it was sort of like Canada, frankly. And they just tightened the system up, and it stripped the right-wing parties in Denmark of their power. It took away their -- issue. And it has stabilized, now you've got this moderate moderate in Denmark means wildly progressive here in the United States, right? Free college, free health care, free cheap buses and everything else. Good public transportation. But anyhow, you got this moderate government that's no longer under assault from the right-wingers, because that was basically the only issue they had. Now, Democrats here in the United States, and I'm talking Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, back in 2024, the election year, but this was in January and February of 2024, way before the election. In fact, before the primaries, the Democratic-Republican primaries had even happened, got together with the Republicans, Jim Lankford, the Republican senator from Oklahoma, who is just a classic Barry Goldwater conservative, and Chris Murphy of Connecticut, a Democrat who is a solid progressive. The two of them put together this immigration reform bill for the United States that would have done pretty much what Denmark's did. And it would have ended the immigration issue as something that the Republicans could freak out about and squeal about, and the Nazis could, recruit it with. And it was going to pass. It had bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. It was going to easily pass. And Donald Trump, looking at that as a primary candidate, knowing, he started his whole thing in 2015 when he came down the escalator saying, immigrants are bad, right? The Mexicans. Donald Trump ordered the Republicans to kill it, and they killed it. And ever since then, Trump has been using immigration as an excuse to create his private secret army and for this horrible brutality that he's inflicting on Americans. So my call for action is for you and me and all of us to reach out to our members of Congress and say we need comprehensive immigration reform now. Even if it's a Republican, because the Republicans were all in favor of this. Let's try to push this through. Let's try to get this issue off the table.